What is going on, my atomic cycle work friends? So today we're putting a cover on a Kawasaki dirt bike seat. We have a lot of local guys that come in that want their seats recovered. They buy the kits online, so we install them. Some kits are better than others, but for the most part they usually go together pretty good. And I'm just going to show you a quick how we do these things. One of the first things you do is obviously we're going to just test fit it. Put it on there, see how it feels, and once you know it stretches over, everything's centered, we know we're going to be able to get it on there. Then you want to look through your stitching. You want to make sure that any of your badging and stuff like that is in the right place. This is usually off. Like these ones are off. It's a little bigger on this side. This one's fairly even, but on this side you can see it rakes down. And then obviously we're going to have to line up our centers. As usual, you always want to find your center points on these. And we're going to do that first. Now what's nice with a lot of the metric bikes is they have little marks where the center is, which is great. Sometimes you do check them to make sure they're center, but these are always right. So now I just transfer from their little line right there over, put it on the other side. So you can see here's that one, and we got one up here. Just going to do a little bit. Now we're going to do the same thing to the cover. Just going to fold it in half, make sure our stitches are lined up exact, and we're going to cut a tiny little V. Right there, so we know that now that's our center point there. Same thing for the front. Okay, now what I'm going to do is the sewing looks pretty good on this. This is a little extra here, so I know when this goes around it's going to be bumpy. So what I want to do is I'm going to trim some of this savage off of here. You've got to be really careful if you do this. Once you do this, you own the seat cover. No one's going to take it back. If you hit one thread, stitching's going to unravel, so you're going to have to go and re-sew it. Okay, here we go. Now, some people glue these, some people don't glue them. If they have a really radical rake to them, sometimes I'll glue them down. This one's I'm not. We're going to pull it nice and tight. It is a plastic pan, but it's pretty sturdy. It's not flexing that much. So now what we're going to do is just going to kind of run around. We're going to center everything up, and I'm going to put, actually first, we're going to switch from steel staples to stainless steel staples. And now we'll take our center point, make sure we're exactly centered, and I'm going to put a little staple here, not even all the way in, just to kind of hold that in place. When you staple, I'll show you here, I'm going to pull this around. I'm going to actually warm this up a little bit. This texture material is nice because it's a little bit thicker, but it also doesn't roll around the edges really that well. So I got that little staple in the back there. I'm just going to work this forward. I want to make sure that this comes around. Now what's tough with this, you don't want to over pull this because you'll just take that foam and dip it really down. So we're just going to pull a little bit. Then we're going to put a staple in here, make sure our center lines are centered. Put one staple there. When you staple, I always staple at the end of the material. So what happens is if you have to adjust it and you staple up here and you have to go backwards, you're gonna have holes in the wrong side. I know that we're, obviously this needs to be in this general vicinity. The only downfall of doing this test staple is when you pull it out, there could be two little divot holes in the plastic that show afterwards, but I'd rather have it straight. So now that we have that in there, I'm gonna warm this up. I do not like to try to do all my pulling the first shot. I'll actually take this, get it warm, we're going to stretch it around, do a staple, move to the other side, make sure everything's still centered and aligned up. And remember, whenever you're doing this, you always want to keep your hand on the vinyl because if it's too hot for your hand, it's too hot for the vinyl. Same thing, I put a staple at the edge. Now we're going to do the other side. I'm going to actually cut these. These are a little too thick for me. I have to go back and take that staple off. These straps sometimes are a little too big, so we're just gonna take them off. I don't like when you pull down on these and you can see the bump from these. So what I was doing is, when I pull this down, you can see it's sticking out here. We're gonna stretch it a lot, but still, it just doesn't look right. So I'm gonna take this staple back out. When you're removing staples, always go from this side. You don't wanna go from this side because if you pry, you could rip the seat on the edge. So you get in there, twist, take our dikes, and we're just gonna pull that staple out. Make sure it's not anywhere on our table because if it's on the table, it could actually lead to scratching. If you spin your seat around, there's a staple on there, it's going to scratch your material. I'm just going to come through, trim this side, and then we can try this over again. Now they're still going to see a bump here because I'm not going to go really close to the edge just because I don't want to take a chance of cutting the threads and having to re-sew it. Because every time you have to re-sew it, you have to sew it a little farther in, and that could make the seat cover a little smaller. So whenever you're doing this too, I'm paying attention because like a lot of times you do this, well if you do that, you'll cut that. So I want to make sure I choke up my scissors a little bit and they're nowhere near the cover. Now we're going to do the same thing we already did. I'm going to warm this back up. Yeah, I could already see it's going to be a little bit better here now pulling down. I'll show you. So what I was telling you, so these straps here, it's a lot of material that pokes out. What was happening is when you pull this, it was poking straight out. So by trimming it now, it's still rounded. You can still see it because obviously there is a lot of material that's piled up there, but now it is better. Okay, so we got this center. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come through now and I'm just gonna start working this. And we're gonna heat this up. And you gotta be careful when ever you have any badging or silk screening or embroidery, you don't wanna over pull it. And you do wanna try to correct it. So if this is thicker on one side, you might wanna pull this side a little bit more to even it out. That's kind of what we're gonna do because it's bigger here than here. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab where it's short and we're gonna pull it there a little bit more. Put a little staple in there and we're gonna measure it. We have 1/2 inch to the thread. Yeah, we're pretty good now actually. So I don't wanna really pull that area because I don't wanna, if I yank this now, this is gonna get bigger and I don't want it any bigger. So I'm just gonna pull it tight and we're just gonna go through. A couple of my staples don't look good. We're gonna take them out. Stainless staples are some kind of strange because when they go in, they bend differently. So you want to make sure that you do a nice job. Now we're just going to keep working our way down here. We're heating this up. I just noticed that there's like a imperfection in the foam there, and we want to correct that first. So I'm going to peel this back. There we go. Nice. Now we're good. Whenever I also grab this, the first thing I do is I grab my thumb and keep it straight. So when you grab your material, you're pulling this whole strip, or opposed to if you grab it and pull like this, you're going to make a lot of bumps. So you pull, hold it down. Now we're going to warm up here. So just want to pull that around. You kind of work the material as you're going. A lot of times you want to make sure when you're doing this, you have the Savage underneath it, which is exactly where you put your butt seam together, that little extra piece of material. You want to make sure you get that on the other side of the seat pan. If it's on this side, you'll actually see it sometimes. And if it's inconsistent, as you go around the seat, you'll see like a wobbly in the foam. You don't really want that. Make sure it looks good. Okay, now we're going to go through and try to tighten up the other side a little bit and do the same thing. So this one is just over 1/2 and this one is 1/2. You want to pull this side down a little bit. So where the K is about a 1/16 higher. So we're going to try to stretch it and then we'll not stretch the front. Okay, so that is just over 1/2. Yep, so we're good here again, just like the other side. We're not going to pull that anymore. We're going to end up having to pull this back though because we got some vertical or horizontal wrinkles going on in here. So I'm going to remove the staple here that we put. I'm going to give this a nice tug. Okay, I'm going to pull this really tight. So now we move that down. Oh, not quite enough. We just moved that down probably about 1/2 inch. That was a good pull. 2 staples in it. Now let's get this front and see if we can pull anything else out. And the reason why you want to walk it back and forth when you're doing this, if you look here, you can see just that little bit. I didn't pull this a lot, I just pulled it around, but you can see it's shifted over here. So you want to make sure that you roll this over as we do it, and this stitch here to the edge is the same. Check in here, still has to come over more. So with these straps, which is nice, is you can just measure from one to the other. So I go from the stitch line down, it's 2 1/4. From the stitch line down, 2 1/4, pretty close. Yeah, this one still has to come over a little bit. A good rule of thumb too is if you look at the back side of these seats, especially when there's contrasting colors, you want to make sure that this looks even with the same side here. You see how this kind of bubbles in, so we know that we'll have to do this, which is probably about 3/8 inch. Yeah, so we want to do the same thing on this side, get this to 3/8 inch. Okay. You do have to be careful when you're heating this up, especially around the cloth size of it. You don't want to melt the cloth or burn it. So I'm actually going to walk the foam underneath the Savage here. Try to get this straight. And this one here, I'm liking how this looks better, so I'm going to loosen this up. Seems to be squishing the foam a little bit, and I don't want any pressure on the foam. Okay, so this is consistent up to here. And what we want is be consistent here. So that looks pretty consistent. This could go a little bit more. So I'm working this around, but like I said, I don't want to push too much pressure on the tip of this foam because you can see here, there's nothing there, it's just foam. So if we really push it, like I just take my finger, it changes the profile of that foam. And the way that it sits on the tank of the bike, we really don't want to alter that. So I'm just going to use my peripheral vision. I want to make sure that the black material is underneath here. And then we're going to put a staple in there, bring it back, pull this side. Same thing, I want to pull this in until it looks just like this side. Now we're going to finish off this back here. And hopefully it's pulled tight and we have no wrinkles. And when you're moving this stuff, a lot of times if you grab the seam itself and pull from the seam, you'll really pull the material down. And we're going to do the same thing on this side. I don't know if you can see. What I'm looking at here is, as they're pulling, you can see there's a little wobble here. There's a little wobble up here. So I'm going to heat this up, try to pull that, get rid of that wobble. This stuff here, I'm going to have to come back and probably pull down unless this pull takes it out. I'm just heating the seam up. My hand's right here, so every time I make a pass, I could feel the heat. You know how hot that vinyl is. So I just pulled that really tight when I pull this up. Make sure our peripheral's good. The stitching on the corner, you can see like when you pull it, it changes. So this like gets real wobbly looking. You want to make sure that this stitch falls at the same spot on the curve. Because even though we start from the center, the vinyl is really, really stretchy. So you could actually move it. So even though you put the center here, if you heat it and stretch it this way, you could move that seam anywhere you want, really. So now we're just going to look at it, and I can see there's some little bumps. So I'm looking at here, which I'm sure you can see. There's like a bump there, so I'm just going to kind of massage it over till it's gone. Okay, so now we have all the wrinkles out. Everything looks symmetrical. Some things I don't like about this style seat, which even on the car seats it runs into, you'll see it because of the thickness of the material, it does kind of like a little wobbly thing. They look cool like this, but when you see them like that, sometimes you can see that. Now we're happy with what we have. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go around, and this is kind of what makes things a little more professional, is you could just take the time. If you see any staples that aren't exactly like you liked, we're just gonna remove them. I'll hold my material so it doesn't move. And then we're gonna put new staples in and make sure they look nice. And we go all the way around this. Any of the doubles, if there's double staples. So you can see my original staples that I had holding this in were up here. So now we put our new ones in and we'll make a nice line around it. We're going to remove any of the ones that are not looking that great. Any gaps in there, we'll fill those in. This is kind of the extra part that just makes it a little more professional. So when you look underneath your seat, everything's neat and clean. And then once we're happy with our staples, we're actually going to take and trim this off. So we're just going to trim off any of the extra meat now that we know where it is. One thing you always want to be careful of, if you are trimming these and you are going across a stitch line, you want to make sure there's a staple on the stitch line or you tie it off. And I'll show you what I'm saying here. So I'm about to cut across this seam, but I have staples going across the threads. If you were to cut this and you didn't have a staple across there, it could unravel on you. This one, I'm not happy with that staple over that seam, so I'm going to put a new one there. Okay, so now we're all trimmed up. And now you can see Kawasaki seat. Thanks for watching. Make sure like, share, subscribe, please. Ring the bell. Follow us for more.